Folks, there's a strange little detail hidden inside something we all do every single day, something almost nobody ever stops to question. I'm talking about walking. Today, on Feynman's Path, I want to really dig into this one. And no, this isn't going to be one of those tired lectures about how walking is good for your heart. It's a slightly unsettling story about how the one thing you've done more than anything else in your life might actually be putting a part of your brain to sleep. And the way out of that trap is almost absurdly simple. Let's start with one plain fact. Some of you are listening to this while walking right now, aren't you? From the subway station on your way home, maybe, or along a path by the river. So here's a question. That last step you just took, were you aware of how you took it? Where to place your foot? How long your stride should be? When to extend your hip? When to swing your arm? You weren't thinking about any of it, were you? Of course not. Your brain has automated the act of walking so perfectly that it doesn't even ask for your permission anymore. Now, take a moment to appreciate how astonishing that actually is. Walking is really an enormously complicated computation, dozens of muscles and joints cooperating on a millisecond timescale. Robotics engineers spent decades just trying to get a two-legged robot to walk properly. And yet, you pull off that same computation while chatting with a friend, while debating whether to make soup or stew for dinner, or while spacing out completely, thinking about nothing at all. Your brain handles the whole thing for you, smoothly, without consulting you once. Here's what most people believe. I walk 10,000 steps a day, so my legs are getting a workout, and surely my brain is staying healthy too. My heart gets stronger, my head stays clear. And the older we get, the more strongly we hold this belief. Rain or shine, a lap around the neighborhood every morning, 3 miles down a flat, even path. Plenty of folks in their 60s and 70s do exactly this, firmly convinced that because they exercise every day, their brain must be in great shape too. But here's the thing, there is a fatal flaw hidden in that picture. And the flaw comes, of all things, from the very fact that walking has been so perfectly automated. What do I mean? If we examine this carefully, the way a physicist would, the way Feynman would, we have to start from the simplest possible question: what exactly is happening inside your brain when you walk forward? Until we understand that, the trap stays invisible. Richard Feynman used to insist on something. Believing you know a thing and actually understanding it are two completely different states. We walk every day, so we assume we understand walking. But what's really going on under the hood? We barely have a clue. So let's take a look. Down in your spinal cord, around the lower back, there's a remarkable little circuit. The technical term is a central pattern generator, but in plain language, it's an automatic rhythm machine that bends and straightens your legs in a steady cadence with no command from the brain required. So your brain doesn't actually order up each individual step. It just throws down the big picture settings. Speed about this much, direction that way, terrain like this. And then the rhythm machine in your spine carries out the rest on its own. Meanwhile, the cerebellum fine-tunes the timing, and a region called the basal ganglia manages when to start walking and when to stop. And your cerebral cortex, the command center, the conscious you? It only steps in when a rock suddenly appears on the path or the road turns icy, when conscious adjustment is genuinely needed. The rest of the time, it's basically off the clock. Here's a number that ought to stop you in your tracks. By the time you're an adult, walking forward is the single most practiced movement in the entire human repertoire. Nearly 100 million steps a year, repeated every year for decades. Can you picture that? 100 million times, year after year. What happens when you repeat something that obsessively? The neural pathways controlling walking get wrapped, thickly, in an insulating substance called myelin. Think of it like winding electrical tape around a wire, over and over. The signal starts flying down the line at nearly the speed of light. And in fact, when you measure it, the nerve fibers in this walking circuit are coated with the densest myelin in your entire nervous system, the accumulated result of billions of repetitions. So an adult's walking is carved deep into the bone, so thoroughly automated that it costs almost no conscious effort, less than 1%. And this is actually the brain being clever. Through decades of repetition, it shoved walking down into the deeper, automatic storeroom of the brain and freed up the cortex to think about other things. That's why we can walk and reflect, walk and talk on the phone, walk and stare into space. Listen to all that and you might say, where's the trap? This is perfect efficiency. And you'd be right. In terms of efficiency, it's a brilliant design. But this, right here, is exactly the problem. Pay attention. The brain's refined circuits, The ones that keep your balance, calculate coordination, track space in real time. Those circuits receive almost no stimulation during automated walking. The entire system that keeps you from falling over is running on full autopilot. And autopilot has a cruel feature. No matter how long you leave it on, it never gets any better. It just maintains the status quo. Sit with this for a second. Someone who walks 3 miles every day on a flat path will maintain good heart and blood vessel health. That's true. But the brain's motor control system, the part that starts to break down first as we age, gets not a single grain of new stimulus. While you walk, your heart is pumping away, but the cerebellum, the circuits that fuse spatial awareness, the prefrontal cortex that plans movement, they're all just idling, spinning in neutral. Let me give you an image. A 70-year-old who exercises by walking every day is doing exactly what a person does when they type on a typewriter they've used for 40 years. The fingers move mechanically, but the mind is completely elsewhere. Does their typing improve? No. It maxed out a long time ago. So here's the first jarring conclusion. Walking forward, by itself, cannot stimulate the motor control system that declines with age. It maintains the bare minimum. It cannot turn back the clock. If you've ever wondered why your balance keeps slipping, why you keep catching your toe on nothing, the answer is right here. Now, naturally, a deeper question floats up. How do we wake the sleeping circuit back up? Walk faster? Walk farther? Walk uphill? Intuitively, that sounds reasonable. Work harder, and the brain should work harder too. But that idea rests on a hidden assumption. Changing speed or distance only tweaks the settings of the same program. Whether you walk fast or slow, your brain is running the identical forward walking program. You've turned up the autopilot speed, but it's still the autopilot. The machine itself hasn't changed. So how do you actually smash that program apart? The answer is almost laughably simple. You just turn around and walk backward. And this, right here, is where things get truly strange. The moment you reverse direction, that flawlessly automated computation system comes crashing down. Why? Because, as I said, the rhythm machine in your spine has no pattern stored for walking backward. Not a single one. To those circuits that have been carrying your steps for 50 years without you ever noticing, the backward direction is an alien language they've never seen in their life. So the brain is forced into emergency mode. It can't pull up a memory or run a stored program. It has to build the movement from scratch, on bare ground, inside a set of unfamiliar constraints it has never experienced before. Let me show you concretely how daunting that is. First, your vision, that trusty cheat code, vanishes. Your eyes face forward, but your feet move backward, so you can't see where your feet are going. The spatial information your eyes normally spoon-feed you now has to be hauled up to the brain, scraped together from sensors in your soles and joints. The timing of your muscles flips completely too. Walking forward, your big buttock muscle, the gluteus maximus, contracts as your heel strikes the ground. Walking backward, it has to contract as your toes lift off. The exact opposite. The roles of the muscles that flex and extend your ankle reverse, and the timing of the arm swing that keeps you balanced has to be rebuilt from zero. For every one of these reversals, the brain has to fire up its cells and compute a fresh pattern. There's no automated template to lean on. The amount of computation doesn't just rise a little, it explodes into a different order of magnitude. Where walking forward, the brain just glances over to check the autopilot's running fine. Walking backward, it has to draw a brand new blueprint with every single step. And when you attempt an unfamiliar movement like this, something fascinating happens in a region at the back of your brain called the cerebellum. The new movement pattern sets its neurons buzzing. In particular, the cerebellum has these cells called Purkinje cells, and they start to blaze. The cerebellum's core learning mechanism is surprisingly simple: error signals. Every time a movement deviates from what was expected, every time you wobble or misstep, a signal fires saying, "That was wrong, fix it." Each time that signal rings out, the connections of the Purkinje cells get adjusted a little, and the model of the movement gets upgraded. Now, here's the key. Walking backward drags the cerebellum out of simple execution mode and forces it into active learning mode. And that difference is enormous. Execution mode burns almost no glucose and just maintains the existing pattern. Learning mode burns glucose hard, recruits extra circuits, and forges new synapses. The cerebellum of a 70-year-old walking backward for 10 minutes around the block is firing the way it did on the day they first learned to ride a bicycle decades ago, glowing white-hot with effort. And this is the most important point. The brain's factory for learning movement never shut down. It just powered off the machines because there were no orders coming in. The moment you turn around and walk backward, the motor in that factory roars back to life. Now, this story carries us to a much deeper and more essential truth. It isn't only the brain that wakes up. Something almost magical happens at the knee too. Is this you? Your knee aches right at the front whenever you walk. Going downstairs frightens you, so you've cut back on your walks, worried you're wearing your knees out. Very common story. Past the age of 50, an awful lot of people complain of exactly this. Here's what most people assume. Walking grinds down the knee, so I should walk less to protect it. But the biomechanical data tells a completely different story. When you walk forward, the instant your heel slams down, a tremendous load lands on the knee. Specifically, on the joint where the kneecap meets the thigh bone, the patellofemoral joint. Even on flat ground, that's 1.5 to 2 times your body weight crammed into that narrow spot. Going downstairs, it can be 3 or 4 times. Walk 10,000 steps a day, and that's 10,000 times you press the kneecap into the same groove of the thigh bone, at the same angle, in the same direction, for decades. Every day, always the same direction. Sit with that. Over 50 years, that's hundreds of millions of repetitions. Same spot, same angle, every time. But walk backward, and this biomechanics flips like magic. The front of your foot touches down first, not the heel, and the way your thigh muscles work changes entirely. The result, even at the same speed, the load on the patellofemoral joint drops by roughly 30 to 40% compared to walking forward. Same knee, same cartilage, but change the direction the weight comes from, and you get a completely different outcome. Let me pause and explain the physics of how knee cartilage gets fed, because once you understand this, the true identity of knee pain becomes clear. Knee cartilage has no blood vessels, so how does it get nourished? Like a sponge. When you load and unload weight on the knee, that mechanical pressure pumps joint fluid in, the way a sponge soaks up water, delivering nutrients. Now, what happens if you press on the cartilage from one direction only for decades? The overworked side accumulates damage, while the side that never bears any load goes starved, never getting a taste of nutrients. Picture a joint that, over 50 years of nothing but heel strikes, has been feeding only one face of its cartilage. One side worn raw, the other side withered. But reverse direction, and the entire path of the load shifts. The spot that was always crushed gets relief and finally breathes, and the spot that never saw a nutrient finally gets pressed, and the joint fluid flows in. Pain easing is the natural consequence. And here's the real insight. This isn't a painkiller masking things. You finally granted the joint a new direction of pressure it had craved for a lifetime, one that walking forward had been blocking. Cartilage responds honestly to the signals it's given. Change the signal, and you change its state. So to those of you with aching knees, I want to say this. Your knee probably hasn't worn away. It's most likely just overloaded, lopsidedly, in one single direction. The cause of the pain may not be walking itself, but walking in only one direction. Now, this doesn't apply to every kind of knee pain, and I'm speaking strictly within what the biomechanics has shown. If your pain is severe, of course a professional diagnosis comes first. So a new question rises. When you lose that reliable cheat code, when your eyes can no longer guide you, what happens to your sensory system? Right here lies the secret to why walking backward sharpens your balance so spectacularly. When you walk forward, your brain blends 3 sources of information to keep you balanced. The visual input from your eyes, the head position input from the balance organs in your inner ear, and the position sense coming from your muscles and joints, which we call proprioception. But when walking forward, vision dominates overwhelmingly. The eyes spoon-feed nearly all the spatial information, so the other senses just loaf around half asleep. Then you walk backward, and the visual channel gets cut off. You can't see where your feet are going. To deal with this emergency, the brain has no choice but to crank the volume of proprioception way up. The sensory receptors in your ankles, knees, and hips, which were never asked for much when walking forward, now have to fire ultra-high-definition spatial data up to the brain. That's why first-time backward walkers all say the same thing. Suddenly I can feel my feet, the soles of my feet, with a vividness I never felt in years of walking forward. This is not in your head. It's an utterly real response, created as the brain dials the sensitivity of its receptors to the extreme to do the job the eyes can no longer do. Those sensory signals were there all along. The brain simply never bothered to listen because the eyes handled everything. And this process, where the brain forcibly rebalances the weighting of the senses, is the very same principle used to rehabilitate patients whose balance organs are damaged. You deliberately block one sense to force the brain to lean harder on the ones that remain. In other words, walking backward is the finest proprioception training program you can run, alone, in your own home. Why does that matter? Our ability to precisely sense the position of our joints drops sharply with age. The number of receptors falls, nerve conduction slows, and the brain's processing isn't what it was. But walk only forward, and you can never halt this decline, because the eyes patch over the missing sense, so precision is never required. Walk backward, though, and the eyes can't cover for you. The sensory system gets pushed to a superhuman level of performance it hasn't been asked for in decades. And the results show up clearly, in numbers. When older adults were trained to walk backward, their scores on single-leg balance tests climbed in just 4 to 6 weeks. Meanwhile, those who walked only forward, just as diligently over the same span, showed no improvement in balance at all. And here a crucial realization emerges. The thing that truly protects an older person's balance isn't walking itself, it's novelty. The brain circuits that compute balance don't budge for mere repetition, they respond only to challenge. Walking forward is repetition. Walking backward is challenge. That difference produced this enormous result. Now, I haven't told you the strangest part yet. Walking backward doesn't just wake the motor nerves. It powerfully rouses brain regions that seem to have nothing to do with walking, the thinking parts of the brain that grow foggy as we age. There's a famous clinical test that shows this, the walking while talking test. You have an older person walk and hold a conversation at the same time. Some of them stop walking or stumble because they're concentrating on the conversation. According to one large study, the people who falter like this turn out to be at far greater risk of a serious fall later on. Why? It sounds odd at first, so let's take it apart slowly. As we saw when you're young, walking is fully handled in the automatic storeroom, but with age, that automation loosens. So walking starts nibbling away at the cortex's cognitive resources, your thinking power. Add a second task, talking, and the brain's remaining resources run dry and overload. That's the faltering. It's quietly heartbreaking evidence that the walking program which the automatic system handled with ease in your 30s now won't run properly without the cortex's help. So we have to think seriously here. If even forward walking, the most automated movement a human owns, is eating into an older person's thinking brain, then there's that much less room left over for everything else. Walking and talking gets harder, finding an unfamiliar route feels overwhelming, checking for oncoming cars at a crossing becomes a strain. This isn't because the person suddenly got dull. It's because the brain's motor system has illegally occupied the spare room the thinking brain used to use for free. But walking backward, all on its own, without adding any conversation, pours out an enormous cognitive demand. When you scan the brain during an unfamiliar movement, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which handles working memory and executive function, lights up bright. The premotor cortex, which plans the sequence of movement, surges. The supplementary motor area, which coordinates both sides of the body, hums along busily. Walking backward is, at the same time, a fierce mental workout. You have to guess at the direction of space without your eyes, suppress the automatic pattern in your spine that keeps shoving you to go forward, and plan each step in detail. And here's a stunning overlap. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex shrinks by about 0.5% in volume per year once you pass 60. That's healthy aging. This region is the core zone for working memory and executive function, and when it thins, your thinking slows. You can't juggle multiple tasks, your focus scatters. But here's the thing. The brain regions that thin out with age, and the brain regions that activate when you walk backward, overlap with astonishing precision. The premotor cortex, which plans movement, thins with age but wakes up when you walk backward. The supplementary motor area, which coordinates both sides, thins with age but activates when you walk backward. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which handles working memory, also thins with age but blazes when you walk backward. This isn't roughly similar. It's a custom prescription that targets, precisely, the 3 regions that crumble first as we age. I'll admit, I slapped my knee when I read this. 10 minutes of walking backward a day isn't simple leg exercise. It's a kind of brain revival project, precision striking the very regions an aging brain is losing. Of course, pills or simple brain games alone won't do it. The brain only changes when the dual pressure of movement and cognition is applied through an unfamiliar action. And walking backward is one of the few proven methods that applies both pressures at once. So what happens when you actually measure 10 minutes of backward walking a day? Honestly, my jaw dropped putting this together. In one study, adults over 60 walked backward 3 times a week, 10 to 20 minutes a session for 8 weeks. The flexibility of their hamstrings, the muscles at the back of the thigh, improved by close to 13%, without doing a single hamstring stretch. How? Hidden here is a famous physiological principle, Sherrington's law. When a muscle on one side of a joint contracts, the nervous system reflexively releases the tension in the opposing muscle to keep the movement smooth. Walking backward demands aggressive use of the muscles at the front of the hip, which means the hamstrings on the opposite side relax automatically, and that relaxation accumulates. The flexibility you'd normally grind out with months of painful forward-bending stretches, you pick up as a bonus. The nervous system lengthened the muscle for you. And when you pull together multiple clinical trials, walking backward consistently improved older adults' balance, walking speed, and everyday mobility. And not by some statistical sliver you'd need a magnifying glass to see, but by margins large enough to visibly change daily life. Here's the finding you absolutely must catch. It's been demonstrated across several studies. Practicing walking backward improved forward walking abilities, things like stride length and walking speed, even more than practicing forward walking obsessively did. Let me say that again, because it deserves it. Walking backward made people better at walking forward. Why? The answer is exactly what we saw earlier. Whether you walk forward or backward, the brain ends up using the same integration system. By upgrading the brain's hardware itself through the hard challenge of backward walking, you boost the forward output too as a side effect. Walk only forward though, and you just wear down the old existing circuit, without ever upgrading the machine. There's an extreme case that shows how powerful this is. Stroke rehabilitation. Stroke patients have dead neurons, severed connections, brain processing physically damaged. And yet, when such patients were made to walk backward on a treadmill, their balance improved noticeably in just a few weeks. Faced with a pattern the cerebellum had never stored, it scraped together even the leftover neurons surviving in the wake of the stroke and carved out a new path. So think about it. If walking backward can pull measurable recovery even out of physically damaged brains, then in ordinary people like us, whose brains are merely a little asleep from lack of stimulus, how explosively must this mechanism work? Now, all of this carries us to a vast picture, a moment where your whole perspective flips. Folks, your cerebellum holds fully half of all the neurons in your brain, half. Inside that little fist-sized lump sits half the neurons of your entire brain, packed in tight. And this enormous giant has been sitting around for decades doing nothing, just idling in neutral. We always think of aging as a one-way street. Get old. The brain just declines. An unstoppable law of nature. Accept it and let go. But that picture had a fatal flaw hidden in it. A 70-year-old cerebellum still has countless neurons very much alive. Sure, fewer than in your 30s, the branches a touch simpler, but ready to work like mad, perfectly ready. The brain's factory for learning movement never went out of business. It just powered off the machines for lack of orders. By walking only in the same direction every day, we were handing that factory its own shutdown notice. And with a single decision to turn around and walk backward, you can shake that sleeping giant awake. This carries a meaning that's strange and warm all at once. It means aging isn't something we can only suffer helplessly. Throw the right challenge at it, and the brain stands back up, at any age. Of course, an obvious worry pops into your head. If I walk backward, I don't have eyes in the back of my head. Isn't it dangerous because I can't see? Yes, a perfectly valid concern, which is why safety matters above all. Let me give you the safest way. A long, empty hallway at home works well, or a treadmill at the gym is excellent. Drop the speed to half your normal walking pace, and rather than gripping the handrails tightly, just rest your hands on them lightly. The treadmill pushes the floor along for you, so the risk of tripping drops, and keeping your hands lightly hovering means the brain's balance challenge stays fully alive. Start with just 2 or 3 minutes. Don't be greedy. As your brain adapts, add a minute or 2 each week, creeping up slowly. And if balance feels too shaky, you don't even need to walk anywhere. Grip your kitchen counter firmly and, standing in place, slowly extend 1 foot at a time backward, shifting your weight. The risk of falling backward is nearly zero, but the brain's challenge, smashing your old pattern and waking your senses, stays fully in play. And here's one last thing I really want to tell you. The first time you try walking backward, you wobble, you feel scared, every step puts your nerves on edge. But folks, that uneasiness is the signal. Uncertainty means the brain is taking in fresh stimulus it doesn't yet have an answer for. Becoming hypersensitive means the thinking brain has stepped in to handle what the automatic system can't. So the very moment when walking backward feels so awkward and hard that you want to quit on the spot, that is the moment your brain is evolving at peak efficiency. Difficulty isn't a side effect telling you this doesn't suit you. It's the most thrilling proof that the solution is running at full power, stretched tight. After about 2 weeks, the uneasiness fades, not because the challenge is gone, but because the cerebellum has finally built a wonderful new model of the movement. So the answer to this whole puzzle is far simpler than most of us expected. To put the conclusion first, the secret to keeping our brains from aging wasn't a more expensive pill, a more complicated device, or a harder workout. It was just one small act of will, the will to try walking the opposite way down the direction your brain automated decades ago. In those 10 minutes you spend walking backward, fireworks go off in your brain that forward walking could never give you in a lifetime. The cerebellum throws error signals and rewires its synapses. The prefrontal cortex runs working memory at full tilt. Sensory circuits rusted shut for decades reboot in high definition. And the knee cartilage that was always crushed from one side finally, for the first time in its life, gets to breathe. And the changes made in that short window stay firmly lodged in the brain after the exercise ends. Each step stacks up, forging the circuits you'll use next time even stronger. Today we looked at the thing we believed we knew best, walking, through a completely new lens. And inside that familiarity, we found a sleeping giant. So tonight, before you fall asleep, think about this just once more. Inside you sleeps a vast force not yet awakened, and the way to shake it awake is, surprisingly, right in your hands, or rather, right at your feet. How about it? Tomorrow, somewhere safe, try walking backward for just a few steps. That one small step could be the first signal that wakes your sleeping brain. And with that, I'll be back in the next video with another fascinating and clear-eyed story. Take care, everyone.